Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Tom Meulendijks, which is still quite a cool name, actually, Tom. Tom is the founder of SteelTrace, a pioneering figure in digital asset traceability and supply chain integrity, with a background in transforming how the energy and infrastructure sectors manage documentation, compliance, and supplier performance. With all that, Tom, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on your show. I'm Tom Meulendijks. Interestingly, it's a very Dutch name because it is literally a mill on a dike. And I'm a software engineer by trade. And about 10 years ago, I came in contact with the energy sector, and I saw how they were working in their, especially quality management for steel products. And as a software engineer, I thought, hey, this could be improved if you really apply software, not just for managing documents, but moving everything to data. And decided to start a company to help try and help solve this problem.
That sounds pretty cool, actually. So, SteelTrace, what do you actually do down there?
So it has to do with the process for oil and gas companies where they procure steel. So if you're an oil and gas company, you have very large risks if something goes wrong with one of your assets. You know, something could blow up, something could go leaking, and it could have disastrous consequences. So you want to make sure that all the steel that you buy, that is 100% complying with your specifications. And in order to do that right now, they've created this gigantic system of generating documents, manually reviewing documents, having inspectors going all over the world, checking stuff, witnessing information. But it's a very expensive and very tough process. And it's still not 100% because during these manufacturing campaigns, there are tens of thousands of data points that are being captured. And if you all have to review them manually, it's a very daunting task. So what we do is we have a software that an operator or an EPC can deploy on their supply chain, and it integrates with all of the companies involved. So the lab, the manufacturer, the inspection company, and it captures data directly at the source. And then we have the digital specifications. So we make digital versions of the ITP QCP, which has the specifications of what the product needs to be. And then we automatically verify all that data coming in. So there's tens of thousands of data points are verified in real time. So you always know during the project that if you're compliant, if there's issues and so forth. And then it has an inspection workflow where the people supplying the data and the people that need to endorse that data, like the inspector or the QA or the lab manager, that they can sign off digitally. And as an operator or EPC, you can just follow along the process in real time. So you have everything coming in, and you have a dashboard, and you can see this is the amount of products being produced. This is all the tests that are performed. These are compliant. These are not compliant. This is how far it is in the signing process. And you end up with a fully digital manufacturing record book, which then in operations can be used where now these people are dealing with, the operation people are dealing with poor record quality. If they need to do a life extension study or a root cause analysis, they have to go into a C container full of paper. And with SteelTrace, they have a clickable version of every product and every asset that they have. And they can find everything in real time, couple of clicks. And they have the data they need.
That's excellent. You were talking about earlier about the type of core problems that SteelTrace can resolve. What kind of problems can you actually benefit the energy sector?
Yeah, so it's going into a couple of directions. It has to do with the quality of the products that are being bought, that they are automatically verified, But it also has to do with when you're having a large major capital projects, there's lots of stuff coming in from all kinds of different places, and you've placed orders with lots of different mills and lots of different suppliers. And you have to keep track of all of that, and you have to make sure that everything comes on time and that the things that come on time are compliant so that you don't have project delays. Because if you have project delays, time to new oil, that's the biggest cost factor. You lose revenue. And then, you want to be as fast as possible, but you also want to be accurate. So you want to have products that you're going to use. You want them to be 100% compliant so that you don't have, the additional downtime later on, or even worse, have some kind of disaster with a leak or an explosion and so forth. So those are sort of the biggest problems, challenges that the energy sector faces when procuring material that we solve.
Okay, and that sounds amazing. How does using SteelTrace help reduce project delays?
Well, project delays can happen if there are manufacturing problems, and you want to have manufacturing problems detected as quickly as possible. And now often the manufacturing problems get detected late. So, and you need to have additional inspectors there to witness those processes, to get a hold of those problems very quickly, which is expensive. And with SteelTrace, because you're capturing data during the manufacturing process and you're actually certifying sort of the product, if you will, during the manufacturing process instead of in hindsight, you can find problems really early on, and that can help you predict, like, okay, is this going to be on time? Do we need to place the order somewhere else? Is this mill not going to deliver? And those kind of things. So because everything is compliant really fast, and that everything that is produced, the quantities of what's being produced, that can help you predict the process. And, we feed that all into a dashboard. So projects just can follow along multiple orders from multiple different sources and know exactly where they are in the manufacturing process.
Okay, how is it important that you know where you are in the manufacturing process?
Because if you're buying like large quantities and then you have a project where the whole planning is dependent on everything coming in a certain order. You want your flanges to be there at this point in time. You want these pipes to be there at that point in time, so that for example, the EPC that is going to weld all the pipes together is going to, not going to face delays and have to extend the time that they're using their spool base, for example. So this is all cost factors that add up. So mitigating problems early can reduce the time to new oil or reduce downtime in case of a turnaround or maintenance.
Okay. And I do agree that is really important in any project that any major energy company is going to be doing. And SteelTrace can really help with that, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So every project has like 20% of the budget like allocated for problems. And we would like to return those 20% to the enterprise instead of actually having to use it on the order to mitigate problems. So the contingency budget, we want to bring that back to the enterprise so it can be reinvested instead of used to solve problems.
Okay, so that saving that amount of money on their budget is going to be huge for any company.
Yeah, 100%.
Leading on from what you were saying before, in terms of man hours and costs, what efficiencies and savings can an operator see?
So we've seen on past projects that we saw nonconformities actually go down because of the additional eyes on the process. And we can see that third-party inspection costs can be reduced with up to 60%. But what is much harder to quantify is the disasters that you don't have or the project delay that you don't have. So I know from an operator that we've worked with that they had a project delay of 6 months because the manufacturing record books were so unreadable because they're always like copied, printed, stamped, uploaded again, and emailed around. So, make a calculation of being 6 months later for time to new oil, that's hundreds of millions of dollars right there.
That sounds amazing, actually. It does sound amazing. I was previously, prior to talking with you, I was looking at your video demo, and it mentioned something about compliance design. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so when you use SteelTrace, you certifying during the manufacturing process. So we use the QCP or ITP. So this is for the people that know. This is the quality control plan, which outlines how the product will be manufactured and what it all needs to comply with. We kind of use that as a template for everything that needs to be captured for final certification of the product. And instead of checking everything in hindsight, so compliance by audit, we do compliance by design because you have a predefined set of rules. All the data coming in is instantly checked, and you can just not continue until you meet all the requirements of the customer. And that's what we call compliance by design instead of compliance by audit.
But but it's compliant. Is it really important to have compliance by design on a major project?
Mm-hmm. How important that is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, this is what is preventing problems to arise later on, that you find out, oh, we have a faulty. I know of a project with mooring chains where they found out that there was something missing on a certain area on certain links of the mooring chains, or something was wrong, but they were all already welded together. Like the chain was already done, and then having to go back and find the faulty chain links and having to replace those. There's months and months of project delays, months of additional cost, new steel that has to be made, and so forth. So it is extremely important if you want to be on time with your project and you want to make sure that, and you don't want any problems to happen during the production, to have compliance by design.
Okay. And what problems could you see in production if you didn't have compliance by design?
Well, if there were test failures, or tests were being done late. So, like, hey, there's actually there's stuff being done later than scheduled. You can see non-conformity rates. So what's the percentage of rejections that there's been, all those kind of things. And that gives you a really good insight into how well this manufacturing campaign is going, and, what kind of problems you're going to expect later on in the process.
Okay. So so is the work that you currently do, and is it on large projects? Is it small projects? Is it maintenance projects that you would normally work on?
Currently, we're doing mostly major capital projects on pipelines. So that's sort of the niche where we really broken through, where we're doing lots and lots of projects on that, really, really big ones where there's multiple mills involved and so forth. But what our dream is in the future is to have all products that are made certified in SteelTrace. But then you're also talking about products that are now sold in stock. And in order to do that, you need to get all the mills involved, and you need to have the whole supply chain. So the operators and EPCs that we work with, they share this vision, but they thought, like, where can we do quick wins, and where are we actually in control of the supply chain? Where can we achieve this? Is on these major projects where we're ordering directly at the mill. But the idea is that the manufacturing record books and the MTRs, so the steel certificates, will all be in a digital data-based format, secured by blockchain, so that you don't have any fake certificates in the supply chain, and that you cannot put fake products in the supply chain. And that's the end goal of all of this.
Okay, so how do SteelTrace certify?
Well, technically, the certification still happens by of course, the manufacturer. But instead of them creating a PDF and signing on a piece of paper, or having a digital signature on a PDF, they actually sign in our platform. So the certificates are created in our platform, and there's digital signatures for all of the reports and so forth, and that eventually creates a digital MTR.
Okay. It's really interesting, and very safe as well. Mm-hmm. A safe system that you have. So moving forward, what is your ambition for the company? Could you take your current product line and maybe use it in other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're already seeing pull from the operators that we work with to go into other types of projects, like heat exchangers, pressure vessels, and so forth. And eventually, I think, any product that is procured by an energy company that is of a high risk will have a certification with it. So if we can have digital certifications for all of those projects, that would be really amazing. And we want to have cradle to grave traceability of everything so that eventually, everything can be after decommissioning can be reused. So now we're doing cradle to production, and our digital interface kind of creates then a baseline of the product that is going into production. But now we want to expand that to also have the inspections during production so that in the end, you have a full record of everything. So just to name an example, we have an offshore pipeline. There might be some, let's say you have some little coding defects or issues, but they're acceptable, they're repaired, and you put them into the seabed. If you're going to check that 5 years from now, nobody's going to remember was that a new issue or was that fixed? Was it acceptable or not when you're flying by with your ROV? So in SteelTrace, you have all that information so you can see, oh, that was already there. This is a picture of it. It didn't increase. It's still the same. So it's still acceptable. And the same goes for like pipe wall thicknesses or something like that, where you have like a baseline of this is your pipeline as it is right now. So you can calculate corrosion rates and those kind of things, and then add that information in there until the end of life. And then hopefully by having an exact that you know exactly what you have in terms of steel and chemical analysis and so forth, that you can then really easily send that steel on instead of just selling it for scrap, selling it for a new purpose or new use case and making it more circular.
Okay, so your software and products that you're using at SteelTrace can be used for ongoing maintenance of any major pieces of equipment for any major energy company.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a digital manufacturing record book, which then, the manufacturer record book is the state of the product, the time you're going to put it into use. But, there's no reason why you cannot extend that data with useless information and inspection and maintenance information that keeps up to date the current state of this product, whether it's a heat exchanger or a pressure vessel or a pipeline.
I know when a lot of the major energy companies, they do maybe a yearly or bi-yearly shutdown to maintain a lot of their key equipment. So SteelTrace's products would really save time on that.
100%. That takes a huge amount of planning now because you want to limit your downtime, right? And if you have poor record quality, every couple of years when you have a turnaround, you're faced again with the problem of, okay, what do we actually have? What is actually the current state? What needs to be replaced? And that lives in maybe some companies have software, other companies have Excel files or the brain of the operator of the machine, right? It's but having all of this available, accurate, up to date, 100% checked can really, reduce downtimes or issues during turnarounds. Absolutely.
Okay, because that's gonna be major for any company, I would have thought.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So you mentioned before about cradle to grave traceability. How far does SteelTrace really go in tracking the life cycle of any component?
Well, currently our software goes on sort of until in production, but it's our ambition to expand that functionality to also include the full life cycle until it's decommissioned. So then it's really cradle to grave. So it starts at the steel melt, basically. And then you start adding information, go from heat to lot to product, and then to component or to pipeline, and then going into production and adding all that information for maintenance and inspections and so forth until you decommission this product. And then you have 100% exact information of what you have and what you're decommissioning.
Okay, so you were mentioning decommissioning. Can you use your products in decommissioning, and how would that work?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm still researching, and I saw that you were actually involved with decommissioning, so I would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. But the way I believe it works now is that companies are being hired to decommission a oil platform, for example, and part of the bid is the fact that they can sell the steel scrap. right? So there's value to be extracted from that. Having a more accurate understanding of your asset, and so the exact steel quantities that you have and the exact chemical analysis what you have and the exact state of the products, because maybe they can be reused instead of sold for scrap, can give you a better understanding of the actual value of your asset. So when you're decommissioning and you're getting in those bids can be more accurate and you can negotiate better on those bids.
Okay, so how would you be able to negotiate better then?
Because you are better aware of the thing that is being decommissioned, so you know the steel quantities and you know all of the things that you have in there. So it's better to come to an estimate of the actual value that a decommissioning company is purchasing.
Okay, that sounds amazing as well, because I've worked in decommissioning quite a few times, and it is quite hard to determine your asset value, I think, for any company, especially at the very beginning, because decommissioning takes quite a long time.
Yeah.
An easy job.
But the more information you have, the better your decisions will be, and the better an energy company can understand what value they actually have.
Okay, so do you only provide your services to the oil and gas, or is it renewables and?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we could windmills could be a big market for us as well. They're facing similar problems. We are really trying to get into some carbon capture projects because carbon capture is very highly corrosive, right? So you have to really make sure your materials are correct. So we think we can provide a lot of value there. And then now the whole new ammonia and hydrogen infrastructures that are being built out, they all still use steel. Right, they might use a plastic liner or something, but they all still use steel. So we could be just as valuable there as we can be for an offshore gas pipeline.
Okay, that sounds amazing, actually. So I was actually going to go back to the beginning and to maybe discuss a little bit about your career history. So how did you actually get started?
So I'm living in Maastricht, Netherlands, and that's very close to a big chemical site called Chemelot. And Chemelot has petrochemical industry. So, and I'm a software engineer, so I have nothing to do with this industry. I didn't know about this industry at all, but I used to have like a web agency. We just made software for other companies. So that's been my career. Like second year in college, I started my own business, just making websites. I kind of evolved into an agency with a couple of people on the payroll and making apps and so forth. And at some point, I got asked by this pressure vessel manufacturer, like, "Hey, can you look at our processes? Because one of the specialties that our company had was like, optimizing processes in companies and human interaction with the technology." And there I was faced with this industry and I saw, and so the process that they wanted to optimize is the creation of the manufacturing record book. They have all this data coming in from different sources. They have to maintain weld lists, welding qualifications, welding procedure qualifications, and so forth. And that was all being done in Excel files manually. And then they had these material certificates coming in where somebody is looking in a book to see whether that material certificate complies with the specifications. And they were complaining that they didn't trust the certifications. They said, people change information on them. It's very difficult to determine if they're real. And at the same time, this blockchain technology was coming up. And I was thinking, hey, authenticity of documents we can do with cryptography and blockchain. And all of that information on those documents, or most of that information on those documents, are either a yes or no, acceptable or not acceptable, or values like numbers, chemical analysis, tensile strength, impact test. This is all numbers. A computer should check numbers. Humans should not have to check numbers. So, and then I just thought, like, there's a huge opportunity here. I started calling some other companies that were in the similar sector. And whenever I mentioned material certificates, they said, "Come by, what do you have?" And kind of from that, I built up a case and an idea of what the product should be. Yeah, and then I just started posting online about, hey, this is my idea, this is what I'm doing. And I got approached by an innovation guy from Vallourec and couple of other people reached out basically from the internet, and that's how I got our first pilots going, and we learned the process. We had a couple of mills that actually did pilots with us, and that's where we learned their process, and we made this tool. And then we kind of switched our strategy to go to the operators, because the mills were like, "Wow, this is great, but our customers are still going to ask a PDF, so you have to go and talk to our customers." And that's how it kind of went to. And then now we have customers like Chevron, Aker BP, and we're doing some really really big projects. So.
But that sounds amazing. But did you find it really hard to go from what you were doing before, making up websites, to starting something totally new that you might not have even knew about?
Yeah, I guess I was quite naive. I was quite positive about, like, this is such a big problem. Everybody's just gonna adopt it, right? But then I didn't know about the phenomenon of what is called the oil and gas industry, that moves at a completely different time and a completely different speed and a completely different. That's completely different world. If you're not from that industry, you don't know, right? You don't know, like, that. Oh, there's reasons that things have been done the same way for a long, long time. So yeah, it was when I started, it was I was very positive, but it turned out it was a really really big challenge, because you're a small company and you have to convince really really big companies that there can be an improvement in a process that they have done for 50 years. So yeah, it was quite challenging. So not so much the technology part, because we were already doing more complex applications, but really more about understanding business and big companies and how they work, and understanding the whole dynamic of the oil and gas industry, which is so different from the rest of the world, right? It's such a different business, and it's funny because the people also kind of stick together in that business, right? You're like, if you're from oil and gas, you know all this stuff, and you just get along with each other because you know it. So yeah, it's interesting as an outsider trying to get in. I think by now I'm an insider. I have many many friends in oil and gas, but as an outsider, it was definitely tough getting in.
So how did you go about persuading some of the major oil companies to
Yeah.
to change their way of working, especially if they were doing it for maybe 20, 30 years?
Mhm. I think I think there is an understanding that there is a problem with the current process. So there were seeds. I think at every oil major there are seeds of understanding, like, hey, there are problems now with the process, especially when you buy materials from stock and have to assess if a material certificate is real, right? So, and in the beginning, when we talked to oil companies, they were keeping us away a little bit, because they were like, these guys don't really understand and so forth. But once we've done these projects with these mills and we build out the product and we could show them, like, look, this is what we can actually do with the MTRs that you're getting right now, and this is how it could work. Yeah, then it went a lot faster, and there was a lot of interest. And you could see, like, if we have meetings, then there's like 20, 30 people signing up for that meeting within those companies, and they all want to see, okay, is this really real? Does it really work? And so forth. So by now, if it's often when I go into a meeting, it's like they see water burning, right? It's like, oh my god, this can be done. Let's do it.
Okay, but do you still find that the major energy companies still are quick to come on board, or are they still quite reluctant?
Yeah, nothing's big, nothing's fast in oil and gas, right? So it takes many, many years to gain, trust and so forth, and to say goodbye from a process that you've had for so many years and that you really rely on. And a lot of it also depends on when we are coming in. So if you have a project that is where the quality process has already been established, it's very difficult to get built on top, because then the project is like, yeah, I have a budget. I know that if I'm going to do this the way I've always done it, I'm just going to meet my goals, and my budget is, going to be sufficient. Versus taking this risk with this completely new way of doing things, and maybe it's going to go completely, it's going to get a big disaster, right? So it really has to be carried from the top. It really has to be something that on a high level, people are saying, like, we're moving into this direction. We have to go that way, and then the rest will follow along. And the best way for us is that if we have that engagement, that we get in at a moment where they're in feed, or early on the project when the POs have not been placed yet with the mills, and that they can say, okay, we're going to change the process for this project.
Okay, but for anybody, for our listeners anyway,
Mhm.
our younger listeners, what would you say was the hardest aspect of setting up your own business and carrying it forward?
Yeah. Well, staying cash flow positive is really hard in the beginning. I think, well, there's a phase that you have to go through as a founder. There are phases that you have to go through to understanding. Like I didn't never set up a limited liability company before. I never raised money before. I never sold a product more than once. I've always sold hours, right? Before you were an agency. So if you're going to do that, then this is all stuff that you need to learn, and it all sounds very easy. And time will kind of humble yourself into understanding that these things are not easy. And we've been in quite some roller coaster where we've had financially difficulties. Decision times take a very long time. It also depends a bit on the sector, but in oil and gas, decision times are just I can see you're smiling. You know about this. The decision times in oil and gas can be brutal. So yeah, but yeah, you're just gonna have to do it. It's the only way to learn. Nobody can teach you. Like you have to. I mean, you can have advisors around you that can help you that have been through that. But yeah, a lot of the mistakes you're just gonna have to make and and push through. Just don't stop. I think is the important thing.
I think so too, actually. I think so too. I was going to ask you, you were mentioning how you've gone from selling time to selling products.
Mhm.
What is the difference between them? I know that one's easier to do than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have an agency, it's really easy to get your initial revenue, right? Because it's very clear we're going to hire a person to do XYZ. It's going to take so much time. So it's kind of understood. But for the customer, okay, this is why it cost XYZ. But it's very easy to get started, but it's very difficult to scale, right? So they're usually hit a maximum of the value that you can create pretty quickly. But when you have a product, before people are actually willing to give you money for that product, you have to build it. you have to, you have to get it right. You have to get a real good understanding of how they're going to be using it over and over and over again. So it's a completely different animal. So you have lots and lots of conversations, and everybody's enthusiastic about the idea or whatever. But before you get a PO, you're many years in, right? So yeah, you have to bridge that gap between your idea and when you can actually start generating that value, because you won't get any money until you generate that value. So there's a lot of investment up front, and then hopefully you can resell it multiple times for the value that it actually represents. And and that's how decisions are made, right? Is it cheaper for me to do it this way than to do it that way? And if you can do that, then you can sell your product.
Okay, but then, because I do appreciate if you're selling a product, you're going to have to develop the product first, and that could take years. That could be very, very hard, especially if you're having to, maybe you're working a full-time job, and then you have this as a side project before it takes off. It could be really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I never did it as a side project. I just jumped in. I'm really like the burn your ships kind of person, and then try to make your way to shore, because I think that is the only thing that will create the pressure to keep going in the tough times. And yeah, I mean, companies are generally, they have some innovation budget. If you have a really good idea, there is some money that you can get for a pilot and something like that. And that's what SteelTrace kind of did in the beginning. We had people pay for pilots, and then we kind of built the product with that money and so forth. So, but yeah, and you don't know the actual value that you're going to create until somebody is willing to put a signature on the document that says, I'm going to pay you XYZ for this product, right? And until then, it's all like, people can be really enthusiastic. But when they start to calculate it, they don't, then it's going to be like, okay, well, are we actually going to do this or not? So, yeah,
Okay, okay, but what kind of problems have you run into when running your own business?
Well, lots of problems. Well, convincing everybody to buy into something that doesn't exist yet is the first challenge. Then once they've done that, you have to find the right people to execute. That can be challenging, building a team, finding the right people, because a startup is not like a normal company, right? A startup is it's a tough life. But if you're part of a startup and you can get in early and you can get a little equity stake, you might compress your working life in a small time frame. But that's that's especially in Europe, like not a lot of people think that way. So that's challenging. Finding the people that can, under pressure, deliver, and then really put something on screen that the customer can really understand, and then you have to build a sales machine. You have to, understand the value and then find a process of how can we sell this repeatedly, and how do we market it, and so forth. So there's all of these topics you have to, if you start your business, you have to learn everything: HR, marketing, sales, technology, building, the market, financial projections, everything. You have to at least have a basic understanding of.
Okay, and I do understand that that would be challenging in itself. So, do you have any advice for anybody wanting to create their own startup?
Try to not procrastinate on getting answers to the questions that you have. So don't procrastinate on understanding the value that you're creating, understanding if the product that you're buying, if that you're building is actually going to be used. So try to pull bad news forward all the time. Because as a human, you don't want bad news, so you're always postponing bad news. So you're always like, oh no, we'll build this first, and then people will like it or whatever. But go out there and really, really try to get to the truth of what you're building. Is it really valuable? Is it really something that people are willing to pay for? And I think I've sometimes went into directions as as an engineering brain, we can do this and this and that, and then went into a direction that actually didn't generate that much value for the customer. So yeah, pull bad news forward, I guess, is my advice.
Okay. If you were to give maybe a 5-minute pitch on why a company should use SteelTrace's products, what would you say?
A 5-minute pitch. Why should people use SteelTrace? Well, that's a really good question. I think our customers will benefit a lot from using SteelTrace in terms of cost savings, but also in terms of mitigating risks, especially mitigating risks of disasters, mitigating risk of delays, which will ultimately also impact the environment, right? So if you care about quality, if you care about safety, if you care about the environment and human life and so forth, then I would really look at improving all of those processes with a digital solution that can do things better than humans can at this point. And, so if you care about those things and you want to save some cost at the same time, then I think we are the right product for you.
I think you are as well. So I'm going to wrap things up there. Maybe ask you one more thing. How does SteelTrace's products make the environment better?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, you have less reuse and less of how you say it, you have less excess material because you can better predict and better understand the quality of the products that you're buying. So right now, projects tend to overbuy 20% of product just to make sure that, hey, if we have some problems during manufacturing, we have enough products to replace problems. The other thing is that, okay, once you have that excess material after a project and you have really proper traceability and really proper documentation of what those are, you can resell those products instead of scrapping them, right? And so you can enable reuse of products. Now, and one of the things that we are also working on is that whole cradle to grave traceability, where in the end, better the current state of a product when you're going to decommission it, and therefore also enabling reuse or recycling better. If you better know the scrap that you're putting into a ladle, the less iron ore you have to put in to make it compliant. So the less new ore you need, so you make it more circular. Yeah, and then if you mitigate risks of disasters, leakage of pipelines, or worse, chemicals going into the planet, into the earth, into the sky, that's another factor. The more we can limit that, the better it is for the environment.
I absolutely agree. I do absolutely agree. I do agree with that, especially saving on a chemical leak or oil leak or something like that. Yes. That's extremely important. Right. I'm going to wrap things up. Mm-hmm. That's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Tom for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Thank you very much for having me.
That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.